Welcome back, everybody. I am excited to jump into our professional development session today, all around developing leadership capabilities. This is our third and final session of our series, and today we are looking specifically at moving people and ideas, taking those wonderful initiatives and projects that you've got in your mind and getting them up and running in real life with real people. But before we begin, let's take a moment to just arrive, to center ourselves, and we'll complete a short mindfulness exercise. So the current reality that we're facing at the moment, and often you would have experienced multiple of these things happening at the same time in any organization, whether it be a school or a corporate organization, often we are faced with change fatigue. I know certainly at the moment, in the midst of COVID protocols and regulations, there is a sense of tiredness and fatigue every time a new change comes out into the system. Previous organizations I've worked at and many different companies have got new initiative overload. That idea that everybody's coming up with new ideas all the time. They don't necessarily last, but there's just this fatigue and new initiative overload, which can lead to divided attention. Nobody's sure which of the initiatives are a priority because there are so many competing things and people for your time. And we land in a place where we have a badge of busy. Everybody tells us that they're busy, but are we actually making meaning out of our work? And are we being productive and effective in our work? How have you been? Busy. How's work? Busy. How was your week? Good, busy. You name the question and busy is the answer. Yes, I know we are all terribly busy doing terribly important things, but I think more often than not, busy is simply the most acceptable knee-jerk response. Certainly there are more interesting, more original, and more accurate ways to answer the question, how are you? It might be, I'm hungry for a burrito. I'm envious of my best friend. I'm frustrated by everything that's broken in my house. I'm itchy. Yet busy alone stands as the easiest way of summarizing all that you do and all that you are. I am busy is the short way of saying, perhaps implying that my time is filled. My phone does not stop ringing, and therefore you should think well of me. And it's a provocation I wanted to throw out there as we look at change initiatives and getting people to move. And also the fact that we are busy at the moment, but we don't want to just drop into that phase where we are just constantly telling everybody how busy and important we are. So the reality is that in organizations, sometimes things don't stick. Despite the best ideas, plans, intentions, there are times when ideas, products, and changes simply don't last. And we all would have had personal experiences with that. It might not sound like a big deal, but there are some serious implications if we start a project and it fizzles and it wasn't the right project to begin with. For one, from a leadership perspective, if you are consistently launching new change initiatives and products and not seeing them through, it can lead to a loss of trust in your employees or your followers. Not having clear directions or a sense of reliability in the initiative can increase anxiety and often leaves employees anxious because they're not really sure about when this will last. Will it change again? What are the frameworks? And there's a lack of clarity. It can also increase apathy because people are kind of like, yeah, I'll just wait for this change to fizzle out before they bring in another solution. Ultimately, it leads to burnout and fatigue, which is not getting the most of our employees. It's not getting the most of each other if we are tired and run down because of change initiatives. So the intention behind our last workshop today on moving people and ideas is to really go into reflective and critical thinking about sustainable organizational change. We're going to draw on Rogers, Malcolm Gladwell, and the idea is that we are going to look at what do we do to make sustainable change here in our context. So the idea is that we create some tension. Like all good inquiry learners, we want to be a little bit off balance. And so I encourage you to personally wrestle with this as much as possible from your own perspective with your own leadership goals. This is about you. This is self-work, and hopefully it gives you a greater understanding of how you take your projects forward, whether it's at school or whether it's in your personal life. We're going to kick things off with looking specifically at the law of diffusion of innovation. This dates back to the 60s with Rogers and then was updated from more of an organizational perspective in the 90s by Moore. So despite the best intentions, all too often initiatives don't last. New products fail. New changes don't last. So I'm going to give you a couple of moments to do a bit of reflective writing and a pause here. Where have you witnessed a new initiative flop? What was the product? What was the idea? What happened? And why do you think that that idea didn't last? Why did it not get traction? So we're going to do a bit of reflection time here. And I encourage you just to reflect on those questions and think about where in your life have you seen initiatives that just didn't last. An initiative that just didn't work was quite a few years ago in Victoria, where the state government developed a revolutionary new way to interact with the internet. It was called the UltraNet. And even though the name was amazing, this was a terrible, terrible learning management system that was designed for students and teachers to work together. You know it's a big deal, and the government spends a lot of money on it in Victoria when the government paints a lot of buses and they're going up and down the freeways advertising the UltraNet as the revolutionary new change that education needed. 6 to 12 months later, this investment of millions of dollars of staff training, of development, of moving all platforms onto the UltraNet, and the system pretty much collapsed and died, to the point that even on launch day, when they closed, a lot of schools gave training and said, we're going to launch it that day. The site crashed on the opening day. And so it's been long regarded as an incredible waste of money, but an initiative that perhaps had good intentions, but was a complete and utter disaster. And anyone who was teaching in Victoria at that time still jokes about the UltraNet and the way that it just didn't work. So the law of diffusion and of innovation gives us some theoretical anchoring into how ideas spread in an organization. As you can see here, we've got our good old friend, the bell curve. And Roger started to look at this from a technological perspective and more adapted it a little bit later on. And the idea is that new ideas spread in different segments. In fact, he actually identifies 5 key segments in how ideas spread. We all sit at different points depending on our context. So we might be an innovator at some aspect of our life. It might be technology. You're a real innovator and you jump on the bandwagon. But perhaps for fashion, you are down the bottom. You're a laggard. You are not willing to change your fashion style unless it is mandated that you have to do it by your partner, perhaps. So we all sit at different points on this continuum depending on the context. This is a judgment-free space. You don't have to identify with being an early adopter or an innovator, but our self-awareness does tell us that we know that we're going to sit in different segments depending on the context. So to give you a little bit more understanding, and I think this is important from a leadership perspective because it gives you some theoretical framework into how to get your ideas to move, and also some sort of understanding about how we've moved key ideas and initiatives here at Middleton. So the first 2.5% and a really crucial part of this group is the innovators. These are the people who love a new idea. They're the first to line up for a product launch. It's the Kiasu movement. Simon Sinek says that they challenge the rest of the world to see and think a little differently. They're idea generators. They trust their gut and intuition. They don't necessarily need years of evidence. They will just jump in and do it. And interestingly enough, the innovators generally tend to volunteer. This is why we send out our survey for anyone who's interested in leadership to volunteer first, to see who are the people who are going to do the work because they care. So they would fall into the innovators group. The early adopters are second. This is 13.5% exactly. These are the people that appreciate new ideas and technology. They often come across as open-minded and they can see the benefit in a new idea or concept. They recognize the value of it. They trust their gut, but they're also willing to be happy to trial and experiment and to test new ideas out in their classrooms or in their context. So the early adopters are crucial in getting a movement to happen because they're willing to give it a go and they approach new ideas with an open mind. 68% of us fall into the majority. So we've got the early majority and the late majority. So the early majority are pragmatically inclined, but they learn from the early adopters. They don't necessarily learn from the leader or from the innovator. They look at their peers and they're looking at that next group up for them. So they appreciate the system, but often there is a big gap between the early adopters and the early majority. This is what they call the chasm. And if you can get past the early adopters into the majority, that's when ideas start to spread and gain traction. The late majority are a little bit further on. They're a little bit apprehensive. They're going to wait and sit and watch for others to try. They might be skeptical of new innovations at first, and perhaps they're disconnected with the why. they don't understand why this initiative, why this change, and so they're going to wait and see. So it's important to understand all the different segments across this law, across this bell curve. And last, we have the good old laggards at the end, the bottom 16%. These are the people, perhaps from a tech perspective, who only bought a smartphone because there was literally none others left in the shop. These are the people who learned what a QR code was because they were mandated to do it in order to enter the shopping center. There is countless reasons why people are laggards. And again, I've done #judgment-free. We are all laggards in some context, in some areas of our life. They're often practically minded and they're rational thinking, and they don't necessarily love new ideas or change. So that is some of the key tensions around how ideas spread. Interestingly enough, the research, and we'll go into that in a little bit, talks about how do you make sure these ideas spread? And part of it is that you don't target your ideas at the middle. You don't aim for the majority to begin with. You start at the very narrow end and you target your early adopters and your innovators as the best and most sustainable way to spread your ideas. So a couple of things to consider before we look at Malcolm Gladwell's work is that, for one, knowing that cross-segment of the population exists, be comfortable knowing that not everybody's going to like your idea. They're just not. If you've got a new initiative for your department, chances are that there are a percentage who just don't care. You need to save a seat for the critic, as Brené Brown says, that regardless of your new initiative, there will always be someone who puts up their hand and says, nah, I don't value it, I don't like it. There will always be an aspect of criticism. And one of the key points here is large-scale success is almost impossible if you point your efforts and resources at the middle of the curve, like I said before. It doesn't work if you try and build something for everyone. It just doesn't stick. And one of the key trends is that you can develop loyalty through relationships, that good ideas move because people trust you and that you have integrity. So we're going to pause there for a moment to give you a chance to reflect. You might like to jot down a couple of key words or concepts that stuck out, or just furiously write down all of your ideas as we have a mini break. So how do we get to that magical tipping point and cross the chasm between a few people knowing our idea and our initiative to getting large-scale success? So the research says that you want to aim for 15 to 18% of people on board, and that's about when it tips. Rogers suggests that change is relational. He suggests that the early majority, that 34%, follow the early adopters. So again, you don't target the majority, you target that inner group. They will then influence the secondary group. They need recommendations and evidence and a personal touch. And again, at all times, this is non-manipulative. We're looking at scaling good ideas that are evidence-based and will make a difference to the world through education. So if we have a look at Malcolm Gladwell's work on tipping point, he took a slightly different aspect in his research, and when he published his book in about 2000, and he talked about 3 key areas in order to get your ideas to stick and land. And he did a whole lot of research and case studies about different products that scaled almost overnight. But when he dug down, it wasn't an overnight success. They basically went through the same process of getting to 15 to 18%, and then it tipped. So it's a little bit like Hemingway's, how did you go bankrupt? Well, there was 2 ways, gradually, and then boom, suddenly. So one of the 3 key aspects from Malcolm Gladwell's work is, again, the law of the few. So we're not starting with pitching at everybody, we're starting with a few. He said if you can identify a couple of key movement or influences within that area that you're working on, that's really successful. So he broke down the few people that you need to get on board early as mavens, connectors, and salesmen. The mavens are those people who collect and curate information and they drip feed them to their followers. You've got connectors who have large social networks. They model behaviors and people follow them. So if you've got a new initiative, you might be looking around for volunteers who are connectors. You know that they've got good relationships and they will support your initiative in the school. And lastly, you've got salesmen. These are the people who, without asking, they will tell you their ideas. They're positive, they're contagious, and they share ideas that they love. And through that process, they move people and they get people on side as well. In addition to that, The ideas have to have an element of stickiness. They've got to resonate with people on an authentic, personal level in order for behavioral change to take place. So he says, is your idea memorable enough for people to take action? This is a classic here. Addy was learning how to cook rice for part of his class assignment, and he burnt it so much so that it literally stuck to the bottom. That for him, every time he cooks rice now, he knows what not to do because of the literal stickiness factor. He had the mistake, he learned from it, it's stuck in his memory. So when we're thinking about launching our initiatives and ideas, we need to make it memorable enough for people that it matters to them personally. And it's less about adding layers and layers and protocols and policies and more about adding value. If our ideas add value to our learners, to our community, and to the world at large, then it has a greater stickiness factor. And lastly, it's incredibly important to consider context. Gladwell says that we are more than just sensitive to changes in context, we are exquisitively sensitive to them. Environment matters. So for us at Middleton, we have the same concepts, the same values, the same mission statement, but how they are worked out is very different depending on the campus. This is a photo taken from the stairwell at Bukatima, and the context there is very, very unique, and we have to take into consideration the environment in order to get to the tipping point at that campus. Tampines is totally different, Middleton West, different again. So to bring those couple of ideas together, hopefully you can see some threads there when you're thinking about your initiatives and leadership roles in the next 12 to 18 months, that we've got the law of diffusion of innovation sitting there, and we can access that through research. We know that there will be early adopters, those who jump onto our ideas quickly, and that there is a gap between early adopters and early majority, and that's the space that we are encouraged to work in. Secondly, we know that from Gladwell, we need to start with a small group of committed individuals, hopefully ones who have a positive and relational energy, and that our ideas need to have some sort of stickiness. They need to be memorable and they need to be a value add in order for the change to take place. And lastly, as a provocation, something to keep you off balance, it's mindful to be aware that we are all in sales now. Dan Pink's book that came out almost 10 years ago talked about the fact that the way that the world is constructed at the moment, with personal branding, with online CVs, with everybody being an influencer of everybody else, is that everybody is in sales now. Everybody's pitching ideas and projects, whether it's can you swap yard duty with me to can you increase the reporting timeline. Everybody's trying to move people in some direction. And we want to make sure that we do this in an ethical way, that we're not about manipulating people for our own personal gain. We're about influencing each other to make the world a better place. And I know I rant on that, but it is crucial. So for us here, our ethical mandate to leadership and influence is that we want to inform, educate, and empower others to make change. We're not about coercion and pushing people to do things that they don't want to do. This is around growing seeds, or planting seeds and growing them into big ideas over time. So that's a lot of research and innovation and ideas for you to think about and reflect on there. So I'll give you a moment again, just have a bit of a pause and reflect and jot down any key phrases or takeaways. So this part of the PD or the workshop is really about looking specifically at academic leadership pathways at Middleton. What does it look like to take an idea, to run with it, and to continue to grow in the Middleton context? So the Middleton academic pathways are both horizontal and vertical. We've based them around Jim Collins' work and his 5 levels of leadership. So I'm going to take you through those 5 levels now and then talk about why those different levels exist and what the different aspects of the levels are. So if you're interested in leadership at Middleton, both, as I said, there is a hierarchy and there is also horizontal growth as well. So level 5 is the top level, which encompasses all of our senior executives and our executive team, our vice principals, SMT. So the level 5 level of leadership talks about building enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. That's what we are working on, leaving a legacy behind us. The level 5 positions are advertised only, and they're also expected to contribute horizontally to conferences, research, and collaborative projects beyond Middleton to inform and improve education in a broader sense. Our level 4s are effective leaders, And these are positions that have grown from within Middleton. And these are called the Middleton Senior Coordinators. And these are people who have shown subject level knowledge, but also a competency to lead a group of people effectively. Attached to this, often there is a stipend and key performance indicators. And again, they're encouraged for horizontal growth to step into having some sort of professional networks outside of the school. They catalyze commitment to and vigorous pursuit of clear and compelling vision, stimulating high performance standards. They work with the strategic plan and school leadership team to execute our overall vision. So that's our level 4 and level 5 leadership. Level 3 are our coordinators. So this generally tends to be for a 1-year duration. It is internal candidates. Sometimes it can be external if we're putting on a new department head. There are time release given for this, PDs, training, and internal coaching by the leadership team. If you're in level 3 or working towards level 3, we're talking about people who can effectively organize resources and work towards predetermined goals and objectives and an action plan. They're passionate, they have subject level mastery and leadership capabilities, and they're being coached along the way as well. Our second level is the Middleton Leads, and these are contributing team members. So they have strong capabilities to achieving group goals and settings. It's a 12-month timeline. Again, there is time release and professional development and coaching, and they're really starting to emerge as leaders and bring teams together. And our last one is our level 1. These are our highly capable individuals, but they're not at the level yet of running a big group or a team. So that's a 6-month project with KPIs and measurable deliverables. There's time release and coaching. And these are people who are passionate about a subject area or passionate about an idea, but they're not experienced necessarily in bringing groups together or working across different sectors. And lastly, we have a review process. So we will review all those different roles, including our own, on a bi-yearly basis and look at the KPIs, but also how you met the school's motto of learn, innovate, and serve. So I thought it's important to share with you the leadership pathways. Again, they also have horizontal growth so that we expect as you're working up the so-called ladder, you are also looking at conferences and sharing research articles and building a network that goes beyond Middleton as well. So hopefully you found our series really useful. Today's session in particular around moving ideas and peoples, but the whole synopsis is really about developing leadership capabilities and empowering all of us to increase our leadership capabilities so that we can better meet the school's vision, mission, and values. Thanks a lot.